How's it going, my bakers? I hope you're having an awesome day. Welcome to another episode. Today, I'll show you how to ferment your dough in the fridge. So let's go to the kitchen and check it out. Alright, cold bulk fermentation, or fermenting your dough in the fridge. I've been meaning to make this video for a long time. This will be the perfect guide for anyone who has never done it before. And if you have experience with it, well, perhaps you'll see something new anyway. I'll show you 3 recipes. We got some nice chewy bread rolls, a focaccia, and a pizza. It is not the same dough turned into 3 different breads. I could have done that, but that would be too easy. Although it is very easy regardless. The same principles apply no matter which bread you make. Let's not confuse cold bulk fermentation versus cold final proofing. They are very different methods, and I will make a separate video about it in the future. Today is all about bulk fermentation, the initial stage of fermentation, in which bread dough develops most of its flavor. And it's called bulk fermentation because in bakeries, a large amount of dough would be fermented before being divided into separate loaves. Quite often at home we only make 1 loaf. So technically that's not bulk fermentation, but we all agree on the term. There's a couple of things to think about when cold fermenting. Ingredients, and how much of each ingredient you want to use, and temperature. Since the dough is fermented for a long time, we want to use a small amount of yeast and make the dough slightly cooler. A common ingredient in cold bulk fermentation, especially for pizza, is diastatic malt powder. It provides food for the yeast, but also brings a nice flavor to the dough. But it is by no means necessary. I just included it because it is quite common. Right, so here are the ingredients for the 3 breads that we're going to make. On the left, we have the pizza dough. Strong white bread flour, diastatic malt powder, yeast, salt, olive oil, and water. In the middle, we got the dough for our bread rolls. Strong white bread flour, yeast, salt, rye flour, and water. And on the right, we have our focaccia dough. Strong white bread flour, whole wheat flour, yeast, salt, olive oil, and water. I chose these 3 because I think they are the perfect candidates for cold bulk fermentation, although you could ferment any dough in the fridge. Now, I did not include a recipe made with a sourdough starter, because those take a long time to ferment anyway. In my opinion, it makes no sense to cold bulk ferment sourdough bread. On the other hand, final cold proofing would be perfect method for it, but not so much for yeasted dough. So what I'm saying, it's best to stick to cold bulk fermentation for yeasted dough and final proofing for sourdough. Temperature control is very important, keep it low. We want the final dough temperature between 24 and 25 degrees Celsius. As a general rule, I like to use 1% yeast. The temperature of my fridge is about 6 degrees Celsius. So with all these stats in mind, I know that after mixing, if my temperature is correct, I can refrigerate the dough right away and leave it in the fridge for as little as 12 hours and up to a couple of days. If your fridge is warmer, you may want to use slightly less yeast or make your dough slightly cooler. And of course it's the opposite if your fridge is cooler than mine. But as a general rule, I would take any recipe, use only 1% instant dry yeast, make it 24 to 25 degrees Celsius, and it will work every time. Right, so quickly let's get to the dough here. I started with the pizza dough, then I made the focaccia dough, now I'm making the bread roll dough. But this is not a recipe video. You can find a written recipe in the link below the video. We're just here to talk about the technique and some of the advantages that it has. Fermenting a dough slowly and for a long time makes it develop a lot of flavor. It makes it more sour, it makes it stay fresher for longer. A bread made out of slow fermented dough is less prone to molding, and there are several ways to slow ferment your dough. You could use even less yeast and ferment it at room temperature for several hours or half a day. Or you could use a pre-ferment, which is made out of a portion of the total flour and the water and the yeast in a recipe, both of which are great methods. But cold bulk fermentation, in my opinion, is the easiest and most convenient way of doing it. Because of the cold, the dough ferments extremely slowly, and it can be left in the fridge for a long time. You can fit your baking around your schedule, and it's way easier than using a pre-ferment, because there is no separate mix. You just make the dough and leave it in the fridge. So as you can see, the temperatures here for the bread rolls were about 25 degrees, for the focaccia just around 24, and a little bit less than 24 for the pizza dough. The method for cold bulk fermentation is very similar to room temperature bulk fermentation, in that the dough should be folded, so it's not totally hands off. You don't just chuck the dough in the fridge and leave it there, you need to pull it out and give it a fold. Now of course you could do that, but there are some benefits to folding. There's a lot of oil in the focaccia bowl, and it needs to be folded into the dough, so that will require about 3 folds. The pizza dough has a hydration of about 70% and it's quite loose, so folding it will make it nice and tight. I would give such dough about 2 folds, and it would be the same if I was making it at room temperature. So let's pop these in the fridge and give them half an hour to cool down. And generally, I do like to use half an hour intervals when folding cold fermented dough, because another reason for folding is equalizing temperature. As the dough sits in the fridge, it cools down, but the surface cools down first. Folding it distributes that temperature evenly throughout the dough. Equal temperature will ensure equal fermentation, so even the low hydration dough should get at least one fold. As you could see, it already cooled down to 22 degrees Celsius only during half an hour. But once we give it a fold and probe it again, you'll see the temperature being even lower. If for some reason your dough came out too warm, then folding could be a great method for cooling it down sooner. Shorten the folding intervals to about 15 minutes. It's a great way to save a dough and prevent it from over-fermenting. You could even put it in the freezer and fold it even more frequently until it cools down. That of course is an extreme case, but who knows, it may come in handy one day. The fermentation rate of cold fermented dough gets affected by the same things as a room temperature fermented dough. So if you are making an enriched dough, like brioche, which is always cold fermented pretty much, you would need to use more yeast because the sugar in it slows down fermentation. The same goes for a dough that contains cinnamon. Also the hydration of the dough. As we know, low hydration dough takes longer to ferment, and a higher hydration dough ferments more rapidly. Same goes in cold fermentation. Right, so it's been another half an hour, we're ready for the second fold. But the dough for the rolls is nice and tight, it does not need any more folding. And it's also nice and cool. One thing that can happen because of its low hydration is that the surface could dry out even if the bowl was covered. So I'll just cover it with a cling film so it touches the surface, just in case. Better to be safe than sorry, right? Now the focaccia will get second fold and the pizza dough will get second fold. It'll be the final fold for the pizza dough. The focaccia will need one more fold after this. It's worth noting that the bottom shelf of your fridge will always be cooler than the top shelf. And you can use this to your advantage. Okay, back in the fridge they go for another half an hour. And this time I'm only folding the focaccia dough. As you can see, some oil got left over. And that's totally fine. It needs to be covered in oil anyway, right? Okay, now these could stay in the fridge for as little as 12 hours and up to 24 or even more. I normally don't do this for more than 24 hours because I think after that it just makes no sense. I think it kind of loses its convenience factor. I mean, you don't want to plan your bakes 3 days ahead of time, right? You make your dough in the evening, next day you go to work or whatever, come back from work, take it out, continue the recipe and have some bread for dinner. And after the dough comes out of the fridge, the steps will be exactly the same as in the original recipe. The pizza dough gets a final shaping and then it's left for the final proof. I'm placing it on a plate so it's easier to move around. And if I'm not ready to bake later on, I can pop it in the fridge to slow down fermentation. When it comes to the bread roll dough, well, that gets divided, pre-shaped, rested, and then final shaped. And as I mentioned earlier, that's the definition of bulk fermentation. We fermented the bulk of the dough and now we are dividing it. There is no need to take the dough out of the fridge and let it warm up. It'll warm up as it's fermenting. You just take it out and continue the recipe as it's written. The only thing that you have to count on is the final proofing time. It'll pretty much double. So while normally these will be final proof for about an hour, now they'll take around 2 to 2.5 hours, or even 3 if your kitchen's cool. The focaccia doesn't require any pre-shaping, so it's going to the final shaping right away. I'm adding more olive oil to the tray because, I mean, you can't have too much olive oil in your focaccia, right? With the final shaping, I just tighten the dough. What I like to do is fold the sides down and up into the middle. It makes it nice and tight and uniform. I like to brush the top of it with oil so it doesn't dry out. And when it's oily like this, you don't need to cover it. But we will cover the pizza dough and the bread roll dough. Now we'll leave these to rest for around 15 minutes. And then we can perform the final shaping for the bread rolls. And finally, we can leave all these doughs for the final proof. By the way, if you didn't know, I have a Flickr page. We have a nice little community there of bakers sharing their bakes, exchanging ideas and recipes. You can find a link for it in the video description or in the pinned comment below. I would love to see your cold fermentation creations there. These 3 recipes are nice and they produce great results. But with all the information I've given you today, you should be able to use this method for any bread. Right at this point I decided that the focaccia needs a little bit more olive oil. I mean, it can't hurt, right? Now there's one method I didn't use in this video, which is making a dough using a pre-ferment and then cold bulk fermenting it. A few people have told me about this. I've never actually tried it. I will make a separate video about it in the future, a comparison video. For me, cold bulk fermentation is mostly about convenience. Using pre-ferment adds another step and another day to the process. But perhaps it produces better results. We'll find out. Okay, the pizza dough is gone in the fridge. I'll bake it last and I'll need to cool it down so it doesn't overproof. We'll start with the bread rolls. I'll brush them with egg and sprinkle them with black sesame seeds. The egg will give them a nice chewy crust and a nice shine. The long slow fermentation makes the texture a little bit firmer, so in the end they kind of reminded me of bagels. The focaccia can sit for another half an hour, it will be fine. Of course I'm gonna top it with even more olive oil. I think at this point there's more oil than water. I've got some nice roasted vegetables to go on top of it. I just love focaccia and pizza. You can top them with whatever you like. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As long as you understand principles and you know what you're doing, then you can do whatever you like. And that's the beauty of bread making. You don't have to follow anyone's rules. Right, a quick sprinkling of sea salt. Let's pop this bad boy in the oven. And let's finally make the pizza. It has cooled down quite a bit, and it's actually easier to handle this way. I still like to use a good dusting of flour. This is a relatively high hydration dough. You can find plenty of pizza recipes on my channel too. Just type in ChainBaker pizza in the search bar. I'm gonna bake this at the highest temperature setting. I'm gonna bake it in my cast iron skillet. It's gonna ensure that the bottom is nice and crispy. Going for very simple toppings here. A little bit of tomato sauce, roasted artichokes, and some parmesan. And we'll top it with some pesto when it comes out of the oven. If you're using paper like this, you gotta be careful when you place it in a pan, because it's very easy for it to fold in half and slide off and ruin everything. So don't rush. And there you have it. We got some nice bread rolls, a lovely pizza, and a super soft and fluffy focaccia. The slow fermentation ensures that they are packed with flavor and they have a nice bite to them. The pizza has a nice crispy bottom and a soft chewy crust. The focaccia is crispy on the surface, but bouncy and chewy in the middle. And the rolls are nice and hearty. And these three are just a small example of what could be done. The possibilities for cold bulk fermentation are pretty much endless. And the fermentation times could be pushed to the limit. It would be nice to experiment and see how long a dough could be left in the fridge. But I will leave that for you to find out, and I hope you let me know if you do. So what do you think this method? Do you ever use it? What's your preferred yeast percentage and temperature? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click right here. Subscribe to the channel, click over here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.